Good evening, and welcome back to your friendly neighborhood Ugaritologist, who is coming at you with yet another point on the list of things that may seem banal if you're a biblical scholar or into comparative linguistics or Semitics, but which may be counterintuitive or may even blow the mind of someone who is not on the inside of these disciplines. And today I thought that as number three, we should do something a little more linguistically oriented. And it has to do with Semitic languages, of course, Hebrew specifically, but any Semitic language. Well, no, not any, but many of them. There are a number of Semitic languages to which what I will be saying does not apply, but to many of them it does. And it has to do with pharyngeals. And what, I hear you asking, is a pharyngeal? A pharyngeal is a sound pronounced in the pharynx, that is, in the pharynx, in down here, the bit you swallow with. That's the pharynx. And Semitic languages, especially ancient Semitic languages, do have a tendency of using the pharynx a lot in enunciating sounds. You hear this all the time if you listen to somebody speaking Arabic, for example. Many people in, say, Europe or America who hear people speaking Arabic think that Arabic speakers just speak in a very hoarse way. That's not it. That's not it at all. The fact is that they are pronouncing pharyngeals like ḥayin or ha, which are both sounds pronounced down here. These sounds are pretty rare if you look at the world in general. You find them here and there. You find them in many Semitic languages. You find them in a number of languages in the Caucasus, for example. You do actually find it now and then in Danish as an allophone of the Danish rhotic, that is the Danish R sound, as in the word for red, which can in Danish sometimes be pronounced rød, 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 in which the initial R is pronounced as a pharyngeal. So you can actually hear it in Europe as well, in Indo-European languages, but it's not common. It's possible that Proto-Indo-European had some pharyngeal sounds. The jury is still out on that, but it's possible. But many Semitic languages do. Arabic has them, many forms of Aramaic, and Hebrew had them and in part still has them. In modern Hebrew, most speakers do not pronounce these sounds. They pronounce the letter әyin just as the same as aleph. That is, they pronounce it as a glottal stop or not at all. So instead of yamdu, they say yamdu or yamdu. And the letter ḥeth, they pronounce the same as the uvular fricative, so it becomes ḥet. But in earlier phases of Hebrew, these sounds, the voiced ā and the unvoiced ḥ, most certainly existed. And they did exist in Tiberian Hebrew, the type of Hebrew we find in the Codex Leningradensis, the perhaps most influential medieval biblical manuscript for biblical scholars. Not the only one, but perhaps the most influential. So pharyngeal sounds were a part of ancient Hebrew and many other ancient Semitic languages. And it wasn't just a part of ancient Hebrew, it was a big part. There are lots of pharyngeals in ancient Hebrew. You can't read a text basically without running into these pharyngeal letters, which kind of creates a problem for modern learners of biblical Hebrew. Many people who study biblical Hebrew for divinity purposes, or for that matter, Semitic purposes, use the modern Hebrew pronunciation. It's the form of Hebrew mostly spoken today, and also it can be regarded by quote unquote Westerners as being easier in some way. It should be said, though, that there are speakers of modern Hebrew who do enunciate the pharyngeals to this day. It's not that common, but you do hear it. You do hear it, and I always smile when I hear somebody do that. I actually find it much easier to understand modern Hebrew when the speaker has pharyngeals, because it then echoes better with my knowledge of classical Hebrew. But again, people studying Hebrew today, or a number of other ancient Semitic languages, or even, say, studying ancient Egyptian, which also had pharyngeals, they often hear from their teachers, no, no, Westerners can't pronounce these sounds, it's impossible. Which is obviously nonsense. Why can Westerners do this when they study Arabic, but not when they study Hebrew? There is no reason for that. None. It's just inertia, you know. Somebody taught somebody that it's impossible to pronounce an ⟨ayin," and so the second somebody teaches his or her students that it's impossible to pronounce an ⟨ayin," and on it goes. And I'm here to tell you that this is wrong. Again, this is something that should be banal. Westerners, whatever that is, I'm not a great fan of that expression anyway. Quote unquote Westerners are not pharyngeal illiterate. Well, illiterate isn't the right word. They aren't pharyngally challenged. They, we, quote unquote, Westerners, those of us who are that, don't, we have no reason to shirk the responsibility of pronouncing pharyngeals if we can, and we can if we want to. Shim'u shamayim wa ha'azini eretz, from the first chapter of Isaiah. Shim'u, listen ye, shamayim, listen ye, heavens, wahazini eretz, and give ear, O earth. And even the very first line of Isaiah, Hazon Yeshayahu ben Amoz, the vision of Isaiah, son of Amos. The word for vision, Hazon, begins with a pharyngeal, and then we have the name of the prophet himself, Yeshayahu. Yeshayahu with an ⟨ayin in it. First, we have the unvoiced. The what you do basically, you say an H, but you constrict your pharynx while doing so. Aha, aha. It's often sometimes described as a hoarse whispering kind of H. Ha, ha. And then you have the ⟨ayin," classically described as the sound of a camel rising while being packed with a heavy burden, a heavy load. Ah, 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 ah. And the way you pronounce an ⟨ayin," there are various different forms of it. It varies a little, especially, say, in different forms of Arabic. It can sound a little different. You do either like a rough, like ah, or you do a little gulp. Ah, depends on which specific form of enunciation you're going for. But in all of the cases, you're down in the pharyngeal or epiglottal region down here, and it's voiced. So it's ah, 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 yamdu, yamdu, alyon, Yeshayahu. And it's a beautiful sound. It is so, so beautiful. A number of Semitic languages have lost this sound. Akkadian lost it pretty early in its history. Akkadian, in the language classically spoken in Mesopotamia before Aramaic took over there, it lost it pretty early. And Hebrew lost it in some of its reading traditions, not all of them, but some. Almost all forms of Arabic kept it to this day, with some exceptions. Maltese usually doesn't keep it, but Maltese is something of an outlier there. But most forms of Arabic keep it. Many forms of Aramaic do as well. Aha, aha, aha. One way of learning how to pronounce an ⟨ayin" is to pronounce an R vowel and then kind of swallow it. Ah, 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 ah. And like I said, it can go the depth of it can and the actual enunciation of it can differ a little, and sometimes you hear it as more of a gulp, like ah, and sometimes as almost a trill down in the epiglottis, ah, ah, and this has clearly varied. You can bet your top and bottom dollar that this has varied, but the sounds are quite similar anyway. Ah, ah. Like I said, it occurs not only in Semitic language. You find, for example, in Egyptian, ancient Egyptian as well. And there is a school of thought for which I have quite a bit of sympathy that argues that the Egyptian ⟨ayin" is partly, or perhaps only, derived from D sounds or Z or the sounds, which sounds counterintuitive, but it may actually be true. There's a word meaning fly, as in the animal fly, which is in Hebrew zavuv with a Z, and it was originally in earlier Semitic a the at the beginning, but we find it in Egyptian as ḥeths, uh, starting with an ♭, and in Coptic as af. And it has been argued that the ♭, the pharyngeal at the start of that word, is in fact a an inheritance of the old the. Huge if true. Uh, there are people who strongly disagree with this, but I kind of love the idea that Egyptian turned old this and this into ah. That is, that they would have moved the sound from the dental region around, at the front of the mouth, all the way back to the pharynx or epiglottis. I love stuff like that. I think it's really cool. But anyway, if you are a quote Westerner unquote, try pronouncing your ‹āyins› if you want to learn Hebrew or Ugaritic or any ancient Semitic language that has these wonderful sounds, or even more modern languages that have them. So do practice your ‹āyins› because they are very cool. And remember that the texts known to us as the Bible read best in their original languages.